had trouble falling asleep. Turning off the light completely didn't help her, nor did it help when she turned on quiet, sleepy music. And the more she tried to fall asleep, the less she succeeded. Why? Because she was stressed. Why was she stressed? Because she wasn't falling asleep. And stress prevents you from falling asleep. When she gave up trying, only then, when she started thinking about other things, was she able to fall asleep. The Parsha of the week is Noach, which means rest. Why was he called by this name? Because his father said about him, "He will comfort us from the anguish of our hands and from the land that God has cursed," meaning that it was difficult to plow the land until Noach came along and invented the plow, which made it easier for people to cultivate the land. The word Noach means to rest. In Yaakov's address to Yisachar, he mentioned, "And he saw that rest and comfort was good." And in another place there is a quote, "You have not yet entered the land of your inheritance, where true rests await," which refers to the land of Israel. There are many benefits to rest, but many philosophers, in addition to our own sources, stress that exerting effort and being active are healthier and motivate people to progress and develop in a greater way than being inactive. Among them were those who noticed a cyclical phenomenon in history in which hard-working and aspiring people are the ones who improve economic conditions. This is how he described the cycle of occurrences. In the initial stage, difficult economic conditions triggered the emergence of strong and visionary people who arise and make positive changes. After planning, exerting efforts, and investments, it's these very ambitious people who advance the economic conditions and lead to a state of general prosperity. But these comfortable and pleasant conditions give rise to spoiled people and such who do not make an effort to do good for themselves and for others, because all physical needs and even luxuries are widespread and available. So why should they bother to put in extra effort? But over time, when we refrain from working, producing, and taking advantage of all the good in order to maintain a stable situation that will last for years to come, the economy deteriorates, and there are shortages in the region and even perhaps in the entire world. And this turns into a recurring historical cycle. Even in the Parsha, we notice that the life of Noach was not a comfortable one. He had suffered from his contemporaries who ridiculed him for many years, during which he was building the ark. He also suffered in the ark itself, in which only he and his sons were available to treat and feed the animals. All in all, they didn't enjoy a peaceful trip in the ark. At this point, it's worth comparing the advantages of being active against the need to rest from time to time. As I mentioned before, the blessing of Yaakov to Yisachar included the words, "And he saw rest, for it was good, and the land was pleasant." But these are followed by the words, "He bent his back to undertake the yoke." In other words, rest is associated with being proactive. Considering the above, we arrive at the serious question, what is actually more desirable, being inactive or being proactive? First, I will illustrate the preference and the praise of being active with a few stories that emphasize this, even in cases where it was difficult. Rabbi David of Lelov once came to his friend's house in a nearby village to accompany him on the trip to visit the renowned seer of Lublin, the Chaya of Lublin. This friend was poor, and his wife could hardly feed him a decent dish other than a simple meal made from flour and water alone. And the woman asked Hashem to give the food a taste of Gan Eden. When Rabbi David returned home, he told his wife that he had enjoyed food that tasted like Gan Eden. Where? In the village where his poor friend lived. It turned out that the woman's prayer that the dish be enhanced with a taste of Gan Eden was fulfilled. Whether the activity is done in the physical sense or in the spiritual sense, it's clear that it's measured by spending time in a positive way. Rabbi Meir of Primishlan related in his father's name, 2 souls were once brought to heaven. One was that of an older man who had passed away, and one was of a younger man that had died prematurely. But in heaven the older man was called a young man, and the young man was called an old man. So Rabbi Meir's father had wondered, if heaven is known as the world of truth, Why call a young man old and an old man young? The reply he received from heaven was that the young man was referred to as being old because he accomplished much more in his few years than the old man did in his long lifetime. Although there are many people who tend to refer to Torah study as a waste of time, in our circles, it's the pinnacle of everything, as we mentioned in our morning prayers, and studying Torah overweighs the rest of them. However, we sometimes prefer to take time from Torah study, and even Torah scholars are engaged in acts of kindness when necessary. I'd like to present 2 episodes with opposite lessons to illustrate this. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish once encountered a man who asked them for a donation as they entered the bathhouse. They told the man to wait until they finished bathing, but when they came out of the bathhouse, they found that he was dead. Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, "We did not take care of him in his lifetime, let's take care of him in his death." And they went on to handle his burial. As they took off his clothes, they noticed he had a pouch attached to his neck that contained lots of money. From this they learned that he didn't die as a result of their negligence. From a much later historical era, one of the earlier Chabad rabbis, the Tzemach Tzedek, would have a vision of his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, who solved his problems in Torah study. At one occasion when he had an unanswered question, he was anxious for his grandfather to reveal himself to him to solve this problem, but he did not merit this revelation for quite a while. A few days later, on his way to the synagogue to shul, he met a Jew on the street who asked him for a loan so he could buy merchandise and sell it in the market. The Tzemach Tzedek told him to wait till he would finish his davening in the shul and then bring him what he wanted. However, as soon as he arrived at shul, he reconsidered that since the market was about to open, and that the Jew, who was an honest and well-known person, might lose out because he did not have the money to buy the goods. So he immediately returned to the market and gave him the money. And after he davened, the Alter Rebbe appeared to the Tzemach Tzedek and solved his problems. What is the difference between the 2 stories? In the case of the Tzemach Tzedek, he knew the man was God-fearing, so he sought him out and gladly assisted him. In the case of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they didn't know the beggar, who turned out to be dishonest, but apparently something in his outward appearance signaled to them that he was not really in need, and he could therefore wait until they finished bathing. And indeed, they found out that they were right. Nonetheless, they made sure to bury him themselves because they wished to perform a mitzvah and an act of kindness when it came their way. In both cases, the rabbis engaged in proactive efforts, though these may not suit their positions as renowned Torah scholars. But even in cases when Torah study is highly regarded, these scholars proved that taking action and assisting others may even override the prominence of Torah study. But even when Torah sages and rabbis are proactive, we have seen that the emphasis is on action and less on sgulot, which are like charms, or even prayers, when it comes to extending help to others. One of the wealthy Hasidim of the Rabbi of Kosov, Rabbi Moshe, became poor and had to pay his overseer for the lease of his property, and if he delayed the payment, the owner would have him sent to prison and suffer other consequences. The man went to the Rabbi of Kosov and told him about his trouble, who in turn forwarded him to his brother-in-law, Rabbi Uri of Strelisk, who was then visiting with him with the Rabbi of Kosov, and he suggested that he ask him for help. The man turned to Rabbi Uri, who answered him, "I share your sorrow, and I'm ready to dedicate the privilege of my immersing in the mikveh to your merit." He went back to the Rebbe of Kosov and told him what his brother-in-law had told him. So the Rebbe of Kosov told him to tell Rabbi Uri that with the merit of his mikveh, he would not be able to pay his debts. So following the instruction of the Rabbi of Kosov, he returned to Rabbi Uri, repeating his request again, and Rabbi Uri responded, "I will give you the merit of the mitzvah of tefillin that I donned today. This is a greater merit." Once again, the man returned to the Rabbi of Kosov with this answer, and the Rebbe told him to tell Rabbi Uri that even with the merit of tefillin, the man would not be able to pay his debts. He said to him, "Go again and tell him that you are asking for help." So he went for the 3rd time, and Rabbi Uri offered him this time the merit of his prayers. So off he went to the Rabbi of Kosov and told him this answer, And the Rabbi of Kosov responded that none of the things Reb Uri offered, including his prayers, would help him pay his debt. Presently, Rabbi Uri went over to his brother-in-law and told him, "How did you intend me to help him?" So the Rabbi of Kosov told him, "This is what I suggest. Both you and I take a few weeks to travel and collect donations for this man until we obtain the amount he needs to cover his entire debt." To this, Rabbi Uri agreed, and they went off to collect money for the man. After demonstrating the advantages of being proactive, let's now examine when and how particularly inaction, silence, acceptance, and rest can be utilized properly. One of the instances concerning a specific command from above is when Hashem told the Jews, who stood fearfully at the foot of the Red Sea while the Egyptians were pursuing them, "Hashem will fight for you and you shall be silent." In another case, King David was commanded to refrain from attacking the enemy until he received the signal of the movement of the nearby trees. This was a very difficult feat for King David, since initializing an attack in due time is expectedly more conducive to being victorious in a battle. And if I expand the theme of being inactive to also refraining from taking positive action, or even informing someone about something that needs to be done, I'd bring as an example the case of the Rebbe of Sochotchov when he was young. At this time, his father, the Rebbe of Biela, was his teacher, and he once turned to him with a difficult question, yet the boy managed to answer it. His father, however, rejected his response and told him, "Don't get used to answering quickly without studying the matter in depth." In his old age, though, the father approached him and told him that upon reviewing the sources he had realized even then that the boy's answer was correct. But since he was still young, he did not want him to become arrogant and therefore postponed his apology until later on in life. To his amazement, his son, the Rabbi of Sochotchov, replied, "Even at the time of the incident I knew that I was right, but I forgave you immediately and didn't argue because of the mitzvah of honoring a father." And from this, let's proceed to a contemporary story illustrating the special quality of not responding when a person is insulted in public. Although earlier I pointed out that taking action exceeds the power of a segula, but when a person remains silent when he is insulted in public, I would not define it as being inactive, because the suffering he endures may also be defined as a sort of a positive action. Therefore, this person has the merit of having his blessings fulfilled. Rabbi Chaim Kanevsky was once approached by a barren woman who asked him to bless her to have children. He was willing to bless her, but he refused to actually promise her that she would have the child, which she also requested. However, he suggested that she should try to be blessed by a person who was insulted in public and didn't respond. Eventually, this barren woman attended a wedding at which the grandmother of the bride had noticed that the mother of the bride, her ex-daughter-in-law, arrived to take part in her daughter's marriage. This infuriated the grandmother, who had strained relations with her former daughter-in-law. So she affronted her in public and demanded that she leave the wedding hall at once. The deeply hurt woman ran off in disgrace, but the barren woman, who watched this confrontation, ran after her and asked her for a blessing for children. Though the approached woman was puzzled about this strange request, when she heard it was initiated by Rabbi Chaim Kanevsky, she wholeheartedly agreed to bless the woman and promise her. Sure enough, a year later, the formerly barren woman gave birth to a healthy child. Another case in which silence played a key factor involved a well-known and saintly rabbi who had gone to visit a Jewish manager of a local bank. The wealthy manager received the rabbi with respect, but the rabbi said nothing and did not explain the reason for his visit. He simply sat for a while in silence and then left. This, of course, took the host by surprise, but he did not tell anything to the rabbi until the rabbi turned to leave. Then he told him, "I'm very glad you came to visit me, but for a busy rabbi like you, there must have been a purpose for you to come to my home." In response, the rabbi answered him that he had come to fulfill the traditional directive of our saints, who said, "Just as it's a mitzvah to say something that will be heard, so it is a mitzvah to refrain from saying something that would not be heard." "What was it that you intended to say that you thought may not be heard?" asked the banker. At first the rabbi didn't want to tell him, But after the banker nudged him for a while, the rabbi said, "Listen, there's a widow who has a big debt to the bank, and if she doesn't pay the debt, her apartment will be confiscated, and she and her children will be put out into the streets." But the manager said, "After all, I can't waive the debt. The bank has rules and debts need to be paid, otherwise her house is up for sale and she will have to leave." "Indeed," said the rabbi, "that's why I really didn't say anything when I came to your house, because I assumed that that would be your response." But after the rabbi had left, the manager rethought the entire situation and decided to take matters in his own hands by paying the widow's debt out of his own pocket. This was because he respected the rabbi for his good deeds and understood that the widow should really be helped. In many cases, there are people who exert efforts only to regret later on what they had invested. An intelligent woman who had built up her career as a psychologist had held a respectable position at Harvard Medical School. In a lecture that brought her over millions of views on YouTube, she admitted that her motivation to pursue degrees and awards stemmed largely from her education, family values, and social pressure. Eventually, she arrived at the conclusion that this way of life was not suitable for her, and she felt that she was constantly trying and striving against her natural stream of life. After some time, she abandoned her high-ranking job and pursued a simpler lifestyle that suited her personality. In her narration, she concludes that people ought to flow with their personality and capacities rather than exert efforts at fulfilling goals whose values are not or have not become important to them. And there are thinkers who have even arrived at far-reaching conclusions about the connection between exertion and rest. As I mentioned in the opening story, overexertion can actually interfere with progress in most areas of life. If a person who stutters tries hard not to stutter, he may stutter even more. And people who try to excel in sales and work themselves down to their knees in this pursuit may find themselves closing less deals than coworkers who take things much easier. Therefore, sometimes you have to put your conscious mind aside and act naturally, spontaneously, after already knowing all the rules. For example, if you had just started taking driving lessons, you will initially find it difficult to know which pedal to press and also to pay attention at the same time to what's going on around the car and to look out of the windows on the road. But with enough experience, it comes naturally to you. The same goes for music lessons, in which we can visualize a teacher telling the student to calm down, not to try too hard, because over time, after getting to know the rules, your performance becomes natural. What about exerting efforts over the service to Hashem? Let us return to the previous Parsha, Parshas Bereshis, the beginning of creation of man. As long as Adam HaRishon was in Gan Eden, he did not have to make an effort in the sense of coping with challenges. Apparently, the protection of the garden came naturally to him. Why? Because in the Garden of Eden, divine energy flowed through him naturally. Only when he and his wife had faltered, when misled by the serpent, did he have to start coping and trying harder, because he began to be influenced by the serpent, which has, figuratively, become the negative force in each of us with whom we need to cope. And this is true until all the evil, including personal misgivings, will be eradicated when Mashiach arrives to redeem us. When you are coping, you have to make an effort. If someone is trying to control you, you have to be alert and proactively deal with it. The fateful question is whether you overcome the challenge by means of exerting efforts or by being calm, which sometimes requires lots of self-control, but which you need to exert efforts to maintain. To give you an example, recently someone approached me complaining about a non-fair attitude he received from a family member. Although I believed his complaint was not justified, I considered I could respond in one of three ways. Either to ignore it and let him deal with his own problem, or I can answer him sternly and prove him wrong. And the third option was to adopt the suggestion of our saints who declare, Ma'aneh rach yashiv chema, which means soft words calm a temper. With the help of Hashem, I took that short moment to contemplate and choose the third option to calm down the flame. How? I replied to the person that I understood his frustration, I identified with his pain, and then explained to him that it was always better to judge people positively and I offered an explanation for the mistreatment he had endured, proving to him why he shouldn't feel hurt, and then I ended the conversation with a compliment I gave him for something positive he had recently done and I had known about. Had I chosen the other two venues, to either rebuke him or ignore his complaint, he may have stayed hurt and may have also viewed me negatively. May we merit to exert our efforts correctly and to know when and how to control them with blessed inactivity when necessary. All we need to do is to allow our inner divine consciousness to take a primary role in directing our actions in a way that would reveal more purity and goodness in the world.